I've watched this pattern repeat itself for more than half a century now. Someone gets a raise, maybe a good one, 10%, 15%, sometimes more. And you'd think that would bring relief. You'd think the knot in their stomach would loosen a little. But what happens instead, more often than not, is the knot gets tighter. The anxiety doesn't go away. It just finds new reasons to stick around. I remember talking to a young man years ago. He was making about $40,000 a year, and he told me he was struggling. Said if he could just get to 60, everything would feel different. Well, I ran into him a few years later, and sure enough, he was making 65. I asked him how things were going. He looked at me with the same tired eyes and said he still felt behind, still felt like he was barely keeping up. And I thought to myself, well, that's the thing nobody warns you about. The income goes up, but the peace doesn't follow. It's not that people are lying to themselves. They genuinely believe that more money will solve the problem. And in some cases, it does. If you're struggling to pay rent, or you can't afford medicine, or you're choosing between groceries and the electric bill, then yes, more income can change your life. That's real. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about the people who cross that line, who move past survival and yet still feel like they're drowning. That's where it gets interesting. That's where the pattern reveals itself. What I've noticed is this. When someone's income goes up, their life tends to adjust around it. Not always immediately. Sometimes it takes 6 months, maybe a year. But it adjusts. They move to a nicer place. They upgrade the car. They start eating out more often. They take better vacations. And none of this feels reckless to them. It feels reasonable. It feels earned. They've worked hard. They deserve it. And they're right. They do deserve it. But deserve and afford are two very different words. And people mix them up all the time. See, the problem isn't the nicer apartment or the better car. Those things are fine. The problem is that these upgrades come with new baselines. What used to feel like a luxury becomes normal. And once something becomes normal, going back feels like failure. So now you're locked in. You've built a life that requires this income and maybe even a little more. And if anything wobbles, if the job gets shaky or the hours get cut or the bonus doesn't come through, suddenly you're not just worried about falling behind. You're worried about losing what you've built. That's where the pressure comes from. That's why the raise didn't bring peace. I've seen people make $200,000 a year and feel broke. I'm not exaggerating. They'll sit across from me and say they don't know where the money goes. They feel stretched. They feel stressed. And you look at their life and it makes sense. They've got the big mortgage, the private school tuition, the car payments, the subscriptions, the trips, the dinners, the gifts. It all adds up. But none of it feels optional to them anymore. It just feels like life. And so they're trapped in this cycle where more income just means more responsibility, more to manage, more to protect. There's this quiet thing that happens when your income grows. Your peer group shifts. You start comparing yourself to different people. When you were making $40,000, you compared yourself to others making $40,000, but now you're making 90 and suddenly you're looking at people making 120 and they've got things you don't have. And you start to feel like you're falling short, even though objectively you're doing better than you ever have. It's exhausting and it's invisible. Nobody talks about it. But it's one of the main reasons people can't get ahead, no matter how much they earn. I think about this a lot because I've lived a pretty simple life, all things considered. I've been lucky, of course. I'm not pretending otherwise. But I've also watched people with far more money than I'll ever need just completely lose their grip on what's enough. They keep raising the bar. They keep finding new things to want. And it's not greed exactly. It's more like they don't have an internal sense of when to stop. They don't have a picture in their mind of what a good life looks like, so they just keep adding to it. And the more they add, the more fragile it all becomes. Financial peace, if I had to define it, comes from knowing what enough looks like for you. And I mean really knowing. Not just saying it, not just thinking about it once and moving on, but actually deciding, this is the life I want. This is what my family needs. This is what brings us comfort and joy. And then building that life and stopping. Not forever. You can adjust. Life changes. But stopping long enough to let your income catch up to your lifestyle instead of the other way around. Most people never do that. They never stop. Their lifestyle is always one step ahead of their income, or right on pace with it. And so there's no buffer, there's no margin, there's no breathing room. And that's why they feel anxious. It's not because they don't make enough. It's because they've built a life that consumes everything they make and then some. And when you live like that, you're always one problem away from trouble. I've seen people make $1 million a year and still feel tense about money. And the reason is the same. They built a life that costs $1 million a year, maybe more. So that income, as incredible as it sounds to most people, doesn't feel like freedom to them. It feels like obligation. They've got staff to pay, properties to maintain, expectations to meet, and they can't step back because stepping back feels like losing. So they stay on the treadmill. And the treadmill keeps speeding up. Here's something else I've noticed. The more someone's identity gets tied to their income or their lifestyle, the harder it is for them to make rational financial decisions. Because now it's not just about money, it's about who they are. It's about how they see themselves and how they think others see them. And that makes everything more complicated. They can't downsize because that would mean admitting something went wrong. They can't cut back because that would feel like failure. So they keep going even when it's not working, even when they're miserable. I think one of the most valuable things a person can do is separate their self-worth from their net worth. I know that sounds simple, maybe even a little trite, but it's not easy to do, especially in a world that constantly measures people by what they have. If you can learn to feel good about yourself, regardless of what's in your bank account, or what car you drive, or where you live, you're ahead of most people. Because then you can make decisions based on what actually makes sense for your life, not on what you think you're supposed to do. There's also this thing that happens where people confuse spending with living. They think the good life is about have. Being more things, doing more things, going more places. And sure, some of that is part of it. But I've known plenty of people who live beautifully on modest incomes and plenty of people who spent a fortune and never seemed happy. The difference, as far as I can tell, is intentionality. The people who are happy with less have thought about what they value. They've made choices. They've said no to things that don't matter so they can say yes to things that do. The people who are unhappy with more are just reacting. They're spending without thinking. They're accumulating without purpose. And that never leads anywhere good. I'll tell you something else. Financial stress doesn't usually come from not having enough money. It comes from not having enough clarity. People don't know what they're trying to build. They don't know what their priorities are. They don't have a plan. So they just spend, hope it works out, and then feel anxious when it doesn't. And the anxiety gets worse as the income goes up because now there's more money to manage, more decisions to make, more ways to mess it up. If someone came to me and said they wanted financial peace, the first thing I'd ask is, what does your life look like when you have it? What are you doing? Where are you living? How are you spending your time? Because if you don't know the answers to those questions, no amount of money is going to get you there. You'll just keep chasing. You'll keep thinking the next level will do it, but it won't. Because the problem isn't the money. The problem is the lack of direction. I've also noticed that people underestimate how much freedom comes from owning less, not in some extreme minimalist way, just in a practical sense. The fewer obligations you have, the fewer things you're responsible for, the more options you have. You can take risks. You can make changes. You can walk away from things that aren't working. But if you're stretched thin, if every dollar is spoken for before it even arrives, you're stuck. You've traded flexibility for stuff. And that trade is almost never worth it. One of the smartest people I ever knew lived in the same modest house for 40 years. He could have afforded something much bigger. He had the money, but he loved that house. It was paid off. It was comfortable. It was enough. And because he wasn't spending a fortune on housing, he had the freedom to do other things. He helped his kids. He gave to causes he cared about. He retired early and spent his time however he wanted. He had peace, not because he made a lot of money, though he did fine, but because he knew what mattered to him, and he didn't let the world talk him out of it. That's rare. Most people let the world tell them what they should want, and the world has a lot of opinions. It says you should have a certain kind of house, a certain kind of car, a certain kind of vacation. It says you should keep up. It says you should impress people. And if you listen to all of that, you'll spend your whole life working for things you don't even really want just because you think you're supposed to. I think the reason income increases don't bring peace is because people are solving the wrong problem. They think the problem is the amount. They think if they just made more, everything would settle down. But the real problem is the structure. It's the way they built their life. It's the gap between what they make and what they spend. And until they address that, more money just means more stress. There's also this idea that success means constantly moving up, bigger house, better car, nicer things. And for some people, that's fine. That's what they want. But for a lot of people, they're just following a script. They're doing what they think successful people do. And in the process, they lose sight of what actually makes them happy. They end up with a life that looks impressive from the outside, but feels hollow from the inside. I've learned over the years that the best financial decision you can make is usually the boring one. It's not the exciting investment. It's not the flashy purchase. It's the steady, unglamorous work of living below your means, saving consistently, and avoiding debt. That's what builds security. That's what creates options. That's what leads to peace. But it doesn't make for a good story. It doesn't impress people at parties. So a lot of people skip it. They go looking for shortcuts. And the shortcuts almost never work. Here's the thing about financial peace. It's not a number. It's not a milestone. It's a state of mind. It's the feeling that you're okay, that you're on solid ground, that even if something goes wrong, you'll figure it out. And you can't buy that feeling. You can't earn it by making more money. You create it by making smart choices, by living intentionally, by building margin into your life. And that takes discipline. It takes patience. It takes the willingness to say no to things, even when everyone around you is saying yes. I think one of the reasons people struggle with this is because it's counterintuitive. We're taught that more is better, that growth is always good, that success means constantly moving forward. And in some areas of life, that's true. But in finances, sometimes the smartest move is to stop, to say, this is enough, to let your income grow while your lifestyle stays the same, to build up reserves, to create space, to breathe. I've watched people do this, and it's remarkable. They don't do anything dramatic. They just stop inflating their lifestyle every time they get a raise. They save the difference. They pay down debt. They build a cushion. And within a few years, their entire relationship with money changes. They stop feeling anxious. They stop feeling behind. They start feeling secure. And that security gives them the confidence to make better decisions, to take smart risks, to live more freely. That's the paradox. Financial peace doesn't come from having more. It comes from needing less. Or, more accurately, it comes from aligning what you have with what you need. When those two things match up, when your income comfortably covers your life and there's a little left over, that's when you start to feel okay. That's when the anxiety fades. That's when you realize you've been chasing something that was available all along. You just had to stop running long enough to see it. I'll say this too. Financial peace isn't the same for everyone. What feels secure to one person might feel tight to another. What feels extravagant to one person might feel normal to someone else. And that's okay. The point isn't to live by someone else's definition of enough. The point is to figure out your own, to know what you need to feel safe, to feel comfortable, to feel happy, and then to build toward that instead of toward some vague idea of more. I think a lot about the people I've known over the years who seem truly content. And the common thread wasn't how much they made. It was how they lived. They had clarity. They had priorities. They knew what mattered to them and they protected it. They didn't get swept up in comparisons. They didn't let other people's expectations dictate their choices. They built lives that fit them. And because of that, they had peace. You see this sometimes in families. One family makes $70,000 a year and seems perfectly content. Another makes $200,000 and constantly feels stretched. And the difference isn't in the numbers, it's in the choices. The first family decided what was important to them and built their life around that. They might drive older cars. They might take simpler vacations. But they're not stressed. They're not fighting about money. They've created a life that works within their means and they're at peace with it. The second family, they let their lifestyle grow with their income. Every raise brought new expenses, better schools, bigger house, nicer cars, more elaborate holidays, and now they're stuck. They can't go backward without feeling like they've failed, but they can't go forward without earning even more. So they're trapped in this middle place where they're doing objectively well, but it doesn't feel that way. It feels like they're barely hanging on. I've talked to so many people in that second category over the years, and they all say the same thing. They thought this level of income would feel different. They thought once they got here, the pressure would ease. But it didn't, because they brought the pressure with them. They brought the habit of always wanting more, always needing more, always feeling like what they had wasn't quite enough. And here's what's sad about it. They're missing the life they have while chasing the life they think they want. They're so focused on the next thing, the next level, the next upgrade, that they never stop to enjoy what's right in front of them. Their kids are growing up. Their spouse is right there. They've got health. They've got time. They've got opportunities. But they're too stressed to notice, too busy working to pay for a life they don't have time to live. I think about my own life sometimes and how different it could have been if I'd made different choices. I could have lived much larger. I could have had multiple homes, fancier cars, all of that. But I didn't want it. It never appealed to me. I liked my life the way it was. I liked the simplicity. I liked not having to think about a bunch of properties or possessions. I liked the freedom that came from keeping things modest. And that freedom gave me something more valuable than any luxury ever could. It gave me peace of mind. It gave me the ability to make decisions without fear. It gave me options. If I wanted to take a year off, I could. If I wanted to help someone, I could. If I wanted to invest in something I believed in, even if it was risky, I could, because my life didn't cost a fortune to maintain. I wasn't trapped by my own lifestyle. That's what I wish more people understood. The fancy life, it comes with strings attached. Every luxury you add is another thing you have to maintain, another thing you have to pay for, another thing you have to worry about. And at some point, you're not living your life. Your life is living you. You're working to sustain the machine you've built, and the machine just keeps demanding more. I saw this happen to a friend of mine. He made a lot of money in business, built a beautiful life, big house on the water, boats, cars, the whole thing. And for a while, he loved it. But then the market shifted. His business struggled. And suddenly, all those things he'd accumulated became anchors. He couldn't sell the house fast enough. The boats were depreciating. The cars were losing value. And he was drowning in the cost of maintaining it all. He told me later, after he downsized and simplified, that losing everything was the best thing that ever happened to him, because it forced him to figure out what actually mattered. And what mattered wasn't the big house or the fancy toys. It was his family, his health, his time, the things he'd been too busy to appreciate when he had them. That's a hard way to learn the lesson. But a lot of people learn it that way. They build and build and build until something breaks. And then they realize they were building wrong thing. They were chasing a version of success that didn't actually make them happy. They were living someone else's idea of a good life, and it didn't fit them. I guess what I'm saying is this. Financial peace isn't out there waiting for you at some higher income level. It's not something you achieve by getting the next raise or the next promotion or the next big win. It's something you create right where you are with what you have by making intentional choices about how you live. It starts with getting honest about what you actually need. Not what you want, not what you think you should have, but what you actually need to feel secure and comfortable and happy. And then it's about building that life and protecting it. Not letting lifestyle inflation steal it from you. Not letting comparisons make you feel like it's not enough. Just building it and living it and being content with it. And here's the beautiful thing. Once you do that, once you create that foundation of peace, everything else gets easier. You make better decisions because you're not desperate. You take better opportunities because you can afford to be patient. You enjoy your life more because you're not constantly stressed about money. You're free. Not because you have a lot of money, but because you've built a life that doesn't require a lot of money. That's the shift. That's what changes everything. And it's available to most people at most income levels. You don't have to be wealthy. You just have to be intentional. You have to decide what matters. You have to build some margin into your life. You have to resist the pressure to keep up with everyone around you. And you have to be okay with enough. Because here's what I've learned after all these years. Enough is a beautiful place to be. It's not flashy. It's not impressive. It won't make people envious. But it's peaceful. It's secure. Tease free. And once you get there, you realize you don't want more. You just want to protect what you have. So if I had to leave you with one thought, it would be this. Stop chasing, start building, figure out what your version of enough looks like, and then create it. Don't wait for more income. Don't wait for the perfect. circumstances. Just start where you are with what you have and build a life that feels right to you, a life you can sustain, a life you can enjoy, a life that brings peace, because that's what this is really all about. Not the money, not the success, not the status, just peace. The quiet confidence that you're okay, that you're on solid ground, that you built something real, something sustainable, something worth protecting. And that feeling, that peace, it's worth more than all the raises in the world.